Okay. Hey, we're live, I think. Pretty
Woo.
sure. How's it going?
It's great.
Super.
Oh, here is actually an Ian.
Hooray!
Hey,
Ian, how's it going?
it's going all right. We're having a recovery day a bit because Astra decided yesterday was maximum buffoonery.
Can you
Excellent.
say more?
Well, she started the morning by trying to do a quick escape.
Oh, right.
Yeah, she made it outside into the garden. Part of it is because there's some ants that are getting in the house, and she's become obsessed with eating every single one of them.
It's basically a limitless supply of food, I think. I think that would solve the food crisis.
Yeah.
Yeah, she just
There's
wants.
so many.
There's so. The thing is, they just keep coming, and she can't eat them fast enough. But see, she just had to go to the. She was going to go to the source, but then she was like, "I'm outside. I don't know what to do." And so I was able to scoop her up and take her back in. And then we have. It's hard to see, but we have this like platform, this fuzzy platform for her to sit on. And she was really enjoying it and really in a deep sleep, and she just kind of rolled off of it and grabbed onto it with her claws and pulled the cover off of it on the way down.
Nice.
So she's sitting over there. It's hard to see, but she's yes, yesterday was maximum buffoon mode.
Yeah, this guy had to get a bath, and he is absolutely the worst. So my friend who does dog grooming out of her house, she always fits me in at the very early morning. So at 7:30, I had to deal with a dog who had to be muzzled and get his nails clipped. So it's always fun.
Oh no! Now
Yeah.
there's a question from the chat. I made up some chatty questions.
Ooh, fun.
Or I made up a chatty question, a couple of them. And we had to do a Capone check. And what starch or veggie or shape is Capone currently? Is he square?
No,
Or
he's
rectangle.
potato. He is potato right now. Fully in potato mode.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think Ophelia is in search and destroy mode right now. She hasn't brought home anything destroyed lately, but
I
it's
like
only a matter of time.
potate sounds more scientific. Like if you said potato, it's like, oh, that's a metaphor. But potate is the scientific term for when a cat, just forms the most compact.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Most compact, two lumpy ends. I think it makes perfect sense.
I think we just need to get it published in a journal, and there's a lot of journals. I feel like, Ian, you can relate to the number of journals, some of which are like clearly weird, fake, like pay-to-play scams, but they're still real in that they're journals. So they're science, I guess, of some kind. It's great.
It'd be funny if that was just like a long-term psychological experiment, like in behavior of people submitting things to academic journals.
Oh gosh, there was somebody who was trying to like prove that all like critical theory about race is bunk. That's what people do all the time.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, we live in such a wonderful planet that's so full of wonderful people who are accepting and just caring about each other. Jesus.
The funny thing is, a similar experiment / stunt was done with a science journal, and basically it had the same results of like the top tier journals don't accept it, and then you just kind of go down and down and down and down and down until somebody. Basically, what happened in most cases is you get to this journal that is very small, gets few submissions, is staffed mostly by overworked graduate students.
And they accept it.
And they accept it, because
Do they charge you?
Usually they don't. The scammy ones do.
That's what I would think, is that the only people who they would be like, yeah, we'll publish this, but you have to pay us $300.
Yeah. I get a lot of invites to be a keynote speaker, which sounds really nice, but then it's like come to Roma for the new food and technology and science fair, and then it's like basically a thing where you have to spend like $1,000 to get in addition to like then you have to fly to Rome. And so it's like a really long email that's very flattering, and then you're like, what is, like, it's not a real thing, like I've never heard of it, none of my peers like go to this event.
What even is Rome, really?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Right, it probably doesn't even exist. I don't know. No, I mean it's just there's so many scams. Like, and I'm sure this happens in every industry, but in academia, like I feel like they're very funny because they're very formal scams. They're not like misspelled. Like everything is like they've put a lot of time into essentially give me money please for like a fake thing that no one in your field knows about.
Isn't that like all of higher ed though?
Yeah, I don't
Not
know
really.
a lot
I mean,
about higher ed.
There's
Higher ed is I mean, maybe
actual-
Wythe has a different experience, but there's parts of higher ed that just are like a rotating series of scams, people scamming each other.
Give me money for a fake thing is like 80% of the work I did when I worked in Marcom.
Fair enough.
Yes.
I teach a communication class, so of course, yeah, give me money for a fake thing.
That's the name of your class, right, Ian?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it should be, but the thing is, it's not even give me money. It's give me like sort of the way I figured it out. It's basically like 12 of you basically pay my salary, and then the other like 28 of you, I don't know where your money goes.
The students that register for class show up and like there's no class, but there's no refunds, and it's like you saw the title of the class.
Yeah.
Joke's on you.
The money goes to Dean's 1 through 27, and the last one goes to a slush investment fund. We were just at in upstate New York, and Cazenovia, New York, just lost its college. So it has a beautiful little college that looked kind of like Bennington or one of these other sort of barn-centric colleges. Like there's an old barn that became a college, and it just stopped being a college because everything's a business now, and they mismanaged it from a business perspective. So instead of like people stepping and being like, people go here, there's kids like currently in class, they're just like, yeah, we declared bankruptcy, the school is over, you're done, like go somewhere else now. And it's like, I'm sure this happens all the time, but just to see it, it's still like everything looks really nice. There's no professors, there's no students, they just closed the doors.
That happened to Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio, in like right around when the real estate market crashed. Actually, a bunch of colleges like folded around that time because all of their like endowment funds were invested in things that just tanked. And so when with the AIG, Bear Stearns, and then AIG and everything, when those tanked, like huge investments got wiped out, and then it made some universities or some colleges insolvent.
You'd think that there would be a special class of entity, like the university system would be more than just a business that is allowed to go bankrupt, because like students need to learn stuff. But no, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just a business. So anyway, on that note, should we chat about our game?
Yeah. Oh wait, we weren't already? I thought this was like a meta discussion.
Everything comes back.
This is the content that you missed, Kelly, on the other stream.
Yeah, that
stuff.
Sounds right.
Yeah, the spoilers. The big reveal was that the Qadida College folded,
and that capitalism was the villain the whole time. That sounds right.
It was the friends we made along the way. The other stream is just really about LinkedIn mostly. I feel like the content is a discussion of LinkedIn, its pros and cons.
Mostly it's pros, honestly. As America, really the discussion, like I said, is it a great dating site or the greatest dating site?
Right.
We joke about that, but I literally had I connected. No, I'm not even kidding. Well, no, this isn't. Okay, like, let me rewind. Okay, I was on Tinder, an actual dating site, and I matched with someone, and we were talking about like they were finishing their MBA program, and I was like, oh, my company is looking for some analysts. Do you want to apply? And then so I got them like to meet up with my HR person. I don't know what happened with that since, but.
So you're just saying the streams are crossing? Is that
yeah.
Dating and Tinder is for job searching?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. So the new professional networking site, Tinder.
You go on to Tinder for jobs. You go on to LinkedIn for dating.
Yeah.
You go on to Reddit for intelligent opinions.
Right.
What?
Yeah, it's the new Quora.
Okay.
You go on Twitter to make friends.
Right.
That's
friends.
true.
It's the new Orchid. So Ian, I have a setting question. What is the dating world look like in Qadida, the domed Cold War city state where the game is currently set?
Well, the thing is, the world of dating is the part of the thing that's very difficult in the world of dating is that you could never have any type of relationship in secret. So it's almost always like pretty public.
So it's just like real life?
Just like real life. It's sort of like there's always going to be someone who knows, right? And really the complication in dating is that you hope that you're like informing, there's the Canadian version of a meet cute is basically if you're an informant and the person you're also dating is an informant, you happen to be going to the same like handler at the same time to report on your date. That's really the kind of Canadian version of a meet cute.
Or if both of you were informing on each other.
Oh my god, they were both at the same dev drop.
Mm-hmm.
They both poisoned each other, and then they both had to give each other the antidotes. That's a very
Oh my
Instead
god!
of they were both roommates, it's oh my god, they were both informants.
The sad part is like in reading about like East Berlin and East Germany, that was pretty true. Like spouses would be like reporting on each other to like at different times.
It's How I Met Your Mother, but instead of like, my roommate is your future wife. It's like my roommate is informing on you, and you're informing on me, and you keep, I don't know, informing on other people. I don't know. This is stressing. Somebody else, please take it.
It'd be like, oh, is your handler the the gendarmerie? Me too. We have so much in common.
Perfect.
I mean, gosh, I am so relieved to hear that. I was dating someone whose handler was in the spin wraiths for a while. And that was they were just, the spin wraiths they only care about a couple of things, but they really care about those couple of things. Like a lot. I'm trying to tell my informant about my day, and they just keep asking like how much, how long I've been part of a subversive, subversive anti-colonial movement. And I'm like, I don't even know what anti-colonial means.
Okay, that's a good answer. Now we know. What do you think, Ian? Do you have any thoughts, just thinking on this, about the level of like how your storytelling about the Cold War and trying to think about things that it relates to today in 2023, and also in the fictional setting that we created in the Stillfleet core rulebook that you're then taking and making a book around? How's that going on the stream? Are there things that are really popping out where you're like, yes, that's exactly what I had in mind? Besides obviously dating, we figured out,
honestly, I think it's like I was just listening to the Worshipful Qadida stream as I was doing some cooking yesterday. And one of the things that I liked actually was, the first thing that I like generally, and I think I said this to people privately, but also in public, I think still some of my favorite moments early on in the stream was the like not being able to get the fare for a bus.
I'm so embarrassed.
Which I can say as a Peace Corps volunteer, this pretty much happens. So,
like, on one hand, I think it's hilarious that we have this team of people who were ostensibly picked because they're like competent, and they get completely bogged down by not having bus fare, even though they're from Qadida, effectively. They should know this. But like at the same time, like as the GM, I can't be like, oh, you happen to find a bus fare on the ground, because it just feels like, I don't know. I really wanted to just run with it.
And I think failing the charm roll really helped that out.
There's Keystone Cops up in there.
And I think that's, and a big part of that is just feeling like, making the world feel very lived in, which I think is a lot of like what I like about Stillfleet settings. It's a lot of what about Radnar and Rain Thieves is it felt like a real place.
Mm-hmm.
Not just like, I didn't want to create a place that was like that's what's really cool about watching the stream, and when people are putting their own textures and NPCs and characters into it, is to make it feel lived in instead of like a board for a game, like just a game board.
Right.
I have to let my cat in. She's back from murdering. 1 second, I'll be right back.
All right.
Yeah, that's very much something I was just talking about with a friend the other day, that like you can make a game system where it's all dreamlike and goofy and anything can happen, which can be fun, but it feels like I feel like, you know, that was something that was more fun as a like younger child, and the older I got, the more like you want some tension between the real world of your lived experience and like imagining in your head a cool thing that couldn't really happen, you know, and exploring what that would be like. So I like that about Qadida. It feels like a real political situation, but not in a boring way. And then, of course, there's also like Escher X stuff and, you know, people who are little bug or huge bugs or little rabbit robots or whatever. There's all kinds of other things on top of the engine of a kind of realistic simulation a little bit.
It's something that I kind of liked about the setting was, and we've talked about this in terms of like mechanics and power levels for characters, which I'd be curious to hear for like Kelly's perspective, like character classes, is that in many ways some of the things that I've been struggling with and like in playtesting is to making sure that the characters in Qadida weren't underpowered when going on these like big space ventures, and that sometimes they were designed around a sort of like, you know, they were designed around being able to navigate a pretty low tech by our standards world, you know, and having like certain connections between people. But like if you're encountering a completely like alien culture, like something where you can't communicate, you can't understand what it is, or the technology is so, I'd say both advanced and different from what you have. Like, I think we had a playtest game once where, like, I used the same, like, counter surveillance power, the scrubber power, but it was on some type of, I think Wythe, it was like a gelatinous eye type camera thing. And the power was supposed to work because Wythe's a kind GM and we were playtesting, but he had to explain, like, okay, so how does this Wetton who's never seen this before somehow, like, jam this system,
Right?
And that's pretty much what it was. Like,
jamming.
Just kind of like smashes it, basically, or I think it was like just turned it the other way. Like
take that skeuomorphism.
Well, what's that advanced power that's like you kick it and it works?
It's called kick. Yeah,
kick fix. Yeah,
but that's I like that about. Yeah, I like that about power design is you can have a wrapper for like a mechanic, like this is the effect, and then the narrative is up to either the player, the GM, or both to decide. And I think that's a really fun way to come up with powers and also to distribute that. So it's not always while there are systems that are fun where it's like the player does everything, I think it's more fun to kind of have just to be able to play with that difference. Sometimes like the GM gets to decide X, or it's like the player, like with Dive or I think a lot of the powers in Stillfleet, it's like, yeah, it just happens. The player decides how it happens. You fix the thing. Yeah.
It's something that I came up with. I think it's one of the scrubber powers is like that you can disappear someone.
Yes. I'm so excited to disappear someone. I can't wait.
Was that defenestrate?
No, that's the Surratt power, which is like you kind of, that was inspired by the Fun City episode where like I think they kicked the dwarven street samurai into a shipping container.
Oh, God, yes.
Yes.
Oh, Kit Kat.
Yeah. And I really liked that moment, and I thought like, that'd be a cool Stillfleet power where you could just I wanted to put it in the Stillfleet system if you can just do it.
It just happens. Yeah.
It just happens. And I kind of thought it's useful, and then useful in a sort of combat scenario to be like, you throw. My sort of vision of it is like if someone has like a big tough around them, you throw the big tough out the window, and then the little person is your target's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. It wants to like surrender as opposed to like fight it out.
You're saying about wondering about the low tech classes of Qadida and other places. I had the opposite problem with the Rain Thieves with the Banshee class because there's basically no tech in at least the main quest of the Rain Thieves. However, Wythe and I decided on having the Banshee class be the one that is able to most readily repair the envirosuits, which is like hugely important if you like leave the main like settled canyon area. Being able to like have a functioning envirosuit becomes like critical. So like the Banshee is all of a sudden MVP about this one really narrow but super important thing. And so I wonder if there will be like similar things, similar like adaptations that can be made with like the lower tech classes, whether they're, witness or one of the Qadidan classes.
It's a thing I found, in this playtest too. Like the hook power can become really, the cork boards, red strings and things like that. I did make that because I originally made that as a bailout, like for in-universe GM, like you make a plot that's too complicated. Someone just spend some grit. Like the players can just spend some grit, and they'll just be like, "Look, just tell me the answer. Like, tell me who I need to talk to."
God, I wish that was real.
The GM just tells the players like, "I think you should use this power."
Yeah.
Yes.
You aren't getting it.
You were looking for some bus fare, and you find a box full of red strings and photographs that happen to be of your people.
So, Kelly, what is that like from the perspective of the metagaming of it's not just a straightforward venture that there's a red team and blue team, and we're trying to coordinate, some kind of interesting narrative cliffhanger back and forth. How's that working in terms of, your character, your powers?
I'm dying to know what blue team is doing.
Oh, God.
I'm remaining unspoiled, and I'm losing my mind. So it's fine. It's fine. But I think that like the cliffhangers are great. Like red team's cliffhanger from what was it, last week? The week before?
Oh, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah. Well, whatever that was. I think leaving it where we did with the party split and having to work our way back from there, I think that's going to be really interesting and vital for, the eventual meetup. But I can't, I feel like last our session we were just kind of like getting our feet wet and figuring out how exactly our each of us players was like going to use our powers. So I think it'll be really interesting to see. I think we're at a point where we kind of like get our powers and we know what we're doing now. Like the whole bus fare scenario was
Bus fare discourse.
Yeah. Like, I think I sent my dad to watch the video, and I was like, there's a whole thing about bus fare that you just have to...
You have to go with it.
You just have to go with it. I don't think he's ever watched, any sort of actual play. I don't think he knows what the game is like. So I was just like, you just have to get through that and understand that that's a huge part of it is finding our stumbling blocks.
Using that as a marketing selling point for Stillfleet as a system, like argue over minutia like bus fare.
Which is the fun part, but like that's getting you into the mindset of like what this universe is like, and then you start to like spin up further from there and be like, okay, well, this was our first major stumbling point, and it was about bus fares. So how, what are our escalating issues? And eventually it's like being kidnapped.
Right.
So what's funny is that, so it was what, a 3-hour game, I think?
Yeah.
We were 2.5 hours in. I still didn't have an end game yet as a GM. But like you all had just gotten to Free Qadida like a little bit before that, and you said you wanted to split the party, and I was like, okay, here we go. And so if Rachel hadn't had Rel go off into the Warden district, I'm trying to avoid spoilers in case other team was listening in.
Right.
Then I was going to present a situation where Leo's blooder, who was very clearly just looking for a fight, would probably get into a fight. And so one of you two groups was going to be accosted. And the way that it panned out, like, seat of my pants. And Rachel played into it perfectly, and she thankfully failed the roll. And so, yeah.
I also appreciate, Kelly, your character is probably the most normal character looking in terms of like everyone else is much stranger, and this is like, oh, this is a good like you want to do a low key, don't panic the public type of. The Free Qadida team is like, don't panic the public, and they've set up a team that's absolutely like, look is like sort of like, look how normal I am on a t-shirt.
But I'm a Gelasti wearing a like furry coat, so I'm not necessarily the most normal looking.
With your Doc Mercuses?
My Doc Mercuses.
Yeah.
Literally,
Oh.
I set up the whole gag for that.
That,
Brilliant.
well, is your character? I guess this might have come up in a place I didn't hear. Is your character like a sneakerhead, or is this like just Doc Mercuses or the boots?
The boots, yeah. I love the spy genre, and I basically wanted to make James McAvoy's character from Atomic Blonde, but into a salamander girl.
Right. Well, I think all the characters work really well, and I think some of this is a GM choice too about how you run games. But I think in terms of the setting, it's interesting, and the bus thing really made me think of the parallelism, because I feel like in Free Qadida, obviously there's no bus fare; you just get on the bus that takes you in a direction. And in Worshipful Qadida, I think it was really appropriate to emphasize that. I mean, actually, I feel like in New York City, a lot of bus drivers will just let you on; they don't really care. But in many other instances, like if you try to do a thing in our society and you don't have money, like you are not allowed to do that thing, and it is enforced by the police, and that is the foundation of our society. It's like you need the money to do the thing. And actually, it made me think it almost would have been really funny to set this up more parallel and have both teams have to get on a bus and just have two very different. Like in the movie version, I'm picturing like a very 70s 2-channel, like it's like black half a screen and half the screen comes up and you see what happened with the Worshipful Qadida team, and that kind of fades, or like a title comes over it, and then you see what's happening in Free Qadida, and it's like the same route, just east to west instead of west to east, but everyone's just kind of smiling like we don't have to pay for things.
Very Guy Ritchie.
Oh, we're gonna do the bus fare thing next session, Kelly.
God damn it.
but it's gonna be you get on the bus and it's free. And I'm gonna really I'm gonna drill this in, like
it's just free, like you start rummaging through your pockets, and the person, the sort of people like, what are you doing?
Right.
You must be new here.
Yeah, in Baltimore, there's what's called the light rail, and it's basically the above ground subway, but you buy your pass, and no one really checks it, and you could be fine just not buying your pass, but like the few cops that are there are gonna hassle you if they feel like it, which they're cops, so
Yeah,
they're gonna do it. But as long as you're not there without a cop, but it's also like $2, so 2 gil. I could have swung if it wasn't 15.
That's an expensive bus.
To be clear, it says 15 in the Qadida document, like in the official source text.
It is expensive.
Yeah.
It is expensive.
I wasn't trying to just harass y'all. Like, I'm just going by the book here. I don't make the rules.
It's made expensive, like a lot of, it's sort of a mass transit system exists, but it's, in the way that I can do this, since there was the Baltimore chat, there's the Phoenix area chat here of like the town of Scottsdale, which you probably hear about in the news. They resist all mass transit. Like they refuse to let to have bus stops or light rail stuff, and nothing goes in there because that's how poor people get it. Is the bus? It's sort of like if you stop the bus, you somehow stop like poor folks from getting there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what Robert Moses? Yeah, Robert Moses in New York. That was his whole thing, was if we build the bridges low enough, the buses can't get through and the poors can't get through.
Yeah. Moses is definitely a villain behind a lot of Stillfleet design. I feel like we're all pretty into like hating on Moses as a fun community activity. So been very influential. There's a lot of good stuff to read about him.
I'm not defending Robert Moses in any stretch of the imagination, But I do think it's important in this context to say that we need to put more hate on John Foster Dulles. Like that's one of those underrated. Like,
sure.
Yeah,
Villains,
I'm
You know,
fine with that too. I think there's enough hate to go around to all these guys.
Yeah, like Robert Moses, obvious villain. Henry Kissinger, plenty, like certainly bad, but like somehow John Foster Dulles just doesn't get enough. Just not enough.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think we need to like publicize these villains more.
Yeah, we'll have to do a mini venture about John Foster Dulles or something.
I was thinking of Alan Dulles. Are they related? That would be weird if they weren't
probably
related.
are.
Yeah. Oh yeah, sibling. He's brothers. Ah, that makes sense.
There we
And they're
go.
brothers as well.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what it would be like to be brothers with John Foster Dulles.
I mean, you probably wouldn't mind because it seems like Alan Dulles wasn't much better.
Yeah.
Like,
There's
we're both assholes.
Probably environment generally leads to siblings having more political alignment, although including in my family, that's not always the case. There's definitely like families where, you know, people have very different ideas. But
there was a congressman in Arizona, and his opponent got, I think it was Andy Biggs, got all of his family members to say, "Don't vote for our brother."
Wait, I think I remember reading about that.
Yeah, and like, and he still, like, Andy Biggs still won because gerrymandering, but like that was like, that's, you know, I saw that and I'm like, Andy Biggs is terrible, but I was like, that's cold. Like, all your siblings show up. Like, if all my siblings showed up and said, "Don't vote for me," I'd be like, I mean, it's true. You shouldn't
Am
vote
I
for
the
me.
villain? No, it's the youths.
That's going to make a fun Thanksgiving dinner for that family.
I know. To be like, listen, we all thought this was wrong.
Well, yeah.
So, Ian, thank you for including the International Food Festival, Intergalactic Food, whatever we called it, the IFF.
I just called it like, I forgot what it was. I was like, internationals, like nations, intercultural. We'll go with that.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, you can thank Kelly for the inception of this idea, because I think, Kelly, didn't you ask if there was food in the station?
So it was when Ren walked in and Rachel was like, "Is there any food going on?" And then you said, "Oh yeah, it's the Intercultural Food Festival." And that was on the Worshipful Qadida side. And then when we got into Free Qadida, I was like, "Okay, Aaron, now you've made it canon, but I'm going to absolutely pin you to the wall with this."
Yeah, 100%. I was like, I mean, I can't argue.
We established it.
Yeah.
It's exactly the thing that would happen, it feels like, in a sort of Cold War-esque style setting. Is like one has like an intercultural food festival, and the other side goes, "Oh yeah, well we're gonna do it too, but it's gonna be better. We're gonna have more cultures." And in Free Qadida, be like, "Oh, and you don't even have to pay."
Well, isn't it at Kentar? But isn't it partially that it's like between the two, or was that not part of the idea?
I don't think we specified. I think in my mind grapes that was kind of like what I was imagining, is it was a somewhat collaborative effort. Like maybe the vendors were present on both sides or something. I'm not sure. But like it was definitely like a unity kind of angle. But if Rel had just said that she's going for the IFF, like she would have gotten through just fine and then not gotten tailed.
Well,
it feels related to dual easing, but I guess that's, again, we didn't. This was so in terms of the backstory. This a lot. Like
we could have called it dual eating.
Dual eating, yeah, there you go. I like that. So let's retcon that. That's the signs all in Derv say dual eating.
There we go.
And maybe in Spin it just says, you know,
it's dual eating, and there's like, you know, food associated with Worshipful Qadida on one side and with Free Qadida on the other side, and you're having it in both hands.
Right.
Excellent.
So I also have to say, related to the food, Ian. So I started on the spam chapter, and I have I decided to do just one list for each die type of the thing, of all the bullet points I sent, of like, you know, weird health science sort of effects, architect, like those kinds of things, span runners, so people who can get you across. And then the one for D100, I was like, well, obviously that just needs to be flora. So I have a list of D100 common names of things that grow only in the span. And those are the only things that grow in the span. But they're just very random. And I think most of them won't have any mechanic. They'll just be a weird thing. But like maybe any of them does anything essentially. But some will have like very clear, if you eat it and you're biological, you get a mutation. But I like to think some of those are anyway at dual eating. That's part of the vibe.
Now, as a game designer, and you have a D100 list, are you tempted to make it kind of like IRL of like, if you eat this, you'll probably get real sick, and then just copy paste 100 times, like 80 times, like you eat this, you're probably going to get sick. Eat this, you're not going to like it. Eat this, you're probably going to die.
Well, what I did, I looked at lots of lists. I like just lists of plants. I was looking at lists of swamp plants, lists of flowers, and a lot of them are like, there's like 100 I found a list of 300 flowers, and a lot of it is like drooping dahlia, hanging dahlia, like real pretty pink, slippery pink, and they're just it's like kind of plays on a theme of genus and species.
Not like bird names, which are all horny.
Yeah, and some of it, there's all kinds. There's horn spotted, midnight, whatever. And I think a lot of it is like that you get the vibe. All of this stuff is pretty. I think similarly, most plants, I don't know, they'd make you sick, but you can't really digest. You can't pull nutrients from them if they're like wild. They're not cultivated and grown agriculturally. So I think the interesting thing also with a lot of different sapient species is like it's I guess it's canon that Waitons can kind of innate that. Like they're good with all of it. They find it all interesting. I don't know about Gelas. A lot of it we just haven't mapped out. So like Kelly could create new canon now by saying whether a protist, a giant single-celled organism the size of a child, could digest most plants and fungi that are grow due to basically quantum radiation, quantum magical radiation in this demilitarized zone, or whether they'd make you sick.
I think anything a Gelesti eats becomes a jelly bean within them. And then,
like visibly as it's being digested.
Wait, is it like a civet cat situation where like you eat it and then it turns into a jelly bean that you poop out and then other people can eat it?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it now.
Gelasti poop is jelly beans. That is
canon.
Yeah. Okay. All right. It's official.
Well, okay. Have you guys ever seen it was like a TikTok or something where it referred to cattails as swamp corn dogs? So
I've heard them called nature's glizzies before.
No, I will never say that word. And you've referred to a hot dog, and I know it was a Costco discussion where we were talking about chicken bakes and then putting a hot dog inside of a Costco chicken bake, and I refuse to call it that word. Now I really want a chicken bake. It's fine. I'm fine.
I think some of these discussions are about like foods people make while very high.
Yes. So
or is this a very regional Baltimore thing? Like
this is a Costco thing. So okay. I don't know if you're a fan of Costco. It's like a $3. It's basically pizza crust that has chicken, Caesar dressing, and bacon inside of it.
It's like a
turducken.
Yeah, it's a Hot Pocket, but it's like twice as long, and it's $3 from Costco.
Huh.
That's a good deal.
It's a really good deal.
Everything should be turduckenized also. As my family's from Louisiana, and we grew up eating turduckens at Thanksgiving, and I found it odd that other people didn't put the meat inside of a smaller meat or a larger meat and then put that inside of a still larger meat. As just like, if you're going to eat meat, clearly you should stack them Matryoshka doll style. That just like makes the most sense to my child mind. Like the logic of it was perfect. And I discovered at school very quickly, like no one else knew what the hell I was talking about and thought it was like gross that we were like cooking.
The first time I heard about them, I thought someone was messing with me. I didn't think it was real.
It's like early modern France is still alive only in Louisiana. It's like if you go to France, it's like Europe. It's very nice, and you go to Louisiana, and it's I don't know. It feels like another time.
Amazing.
Culinarily.
When I heard about the turducken, I had thought it'd be so hard to cook just because dumb me thought like, oh, these are gonna like cook at different rates and it's not gonna come out right.
Exactly.
It's part of why you can't have you have to have some restraint and that you can't have I'm gonna put in some fish inside and then some ground chicken and then put that around deer meat or something.
Oh, I think this was just, middle class, people doing something. I think if you were really rich and or the king, you should have it should end with like a dormouse inside a ortolan, like a little bird.
Oh my god.
And then there should definitely be some game birds in between, and yeah, fish, like maybe a gar, like half of a gar, like a big ass fish. And there's a small. I'm trying to think of how many things you could shove in there. Maybe an eel is eating the ortolan, is eating the dormouse, and like there's like one pimento stuffed olive in the middle or something.
I could get a picture of the cat.
Yeah, but I like the idea that if a Gelasti ate a piece of it, it would become that flavored jelly bean as an organelle inside them as it travels down.
Ian, you were asking about the D100 table for what ailments you get when you consume the fauna or the flora. So in the Rain Thieves, we had the thing of Dust Cup, and I made this table. It's a 2d4 table, and so the values are 2 to 8, and the average roll would be a 5. And that one is the one where it's basically like an opiate, and then 3 and 6 are vomiting a bunch or nothing bad happens. It's basically just flavorful food. And then like the lower you roll, the worse, and the higher you roll, the better. But like I did, like it's a Gaussian distribution of possibilities. So you do end up with most of the results being in a particular spread, but with some extreme values. I don't know. That'd be hard to do with a D100 though.
Every number is equally likely, so you can't hear.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I like, and maybe that's just my design sensibility, but the randomness, so it's non-Gaussian, it's just straight up, like, you roll and you get a bunch of weird stuff. And obviously, if D6, it's a less, like, D100, you're not going to encounter most of those results. So I think that worked really well for things like, what do you find on the dead body? Or, like, what is this speculative, like, what is this made-up flower?
Yeah.
As opposed to, like, something where you want more tight control, like the encounter. Although it could be fun, I guess, because, then you have the 1 in 100 chance of encountering an old one or whatever. It pushes it to like it's there, it's just unlikely.
You open the dressing room door and like, oh, it's Cthulhu. What? Cthulhu looks at you, it's like
yeah, it really changes the plot overnight. It's like now it's not a spy story, it's just you running away from Evangelion monsters.
I'm just walking through and it's like, oh, I have 9 cops. Like you open a drawer and 9 cops hop out. This boing.
It's 9 cops stuffed in an old one.
Snakes in a can.
So yeah.
Each of the cops previously ate like a turducken. Wasn't that thing about like if you eat sausage, you become sausage casing?
Oh, I hate that. I hate knowing that. Thank you.
This is like the cloud droplet distinction or something. There's got to be a case in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy for things inside of things. When are you? What are you when you put things inside of things?
At what point is it inside of you, and what point does it become you?
Right.
It is indistinguishable. Like your turducken goes wrong, and it becomes poultry mash.
So, in terms
How
of
did we
things,
get here?
things inside of things. So, Ian, as you're writing this book, it's still being written. It's mostly written, but you're still working on it. How helpful is this with what things you want to put inside? You're there with the hard segue inside your book about spy games using the grid system. How has the playtest informed that? Has it helped?
I thought you meant how is this discussion helping it? I was like,
this discussion so much, but the overall double venture with all these amazing, brilliant players.
I think it really helps to see a lot of the characters in action and also see how characters are approaching things. That's really what is helpful. And I really think that both teams... Honestly, the thing that I found really surprising and useful is that I think like our team, and this is not spoilery, has not actually done initiative once in 2 sessions. Which feels like actually something I was really going for, in that I think that I wanted a setting, as weird as it sounds, I wanted a setting where things couldn't be resolved through combat. Or like where combat had like a higher consequence. Like I like the idea of, I think as I talked about this with Wythe before, I also love Float City, so this is not ragging on Float City in any way. But one of the things that kind of bothered me was like they kind of like blew up a lot of planets and didn't really face a lot of consequences. And I get that for narrative and moving and like having momentum for these characters forward, like that makes a lot of sense. But I kind of thought like, the Worshipful Company is bad, and I'm not going to say that they're good, but in any way, but I think they might draw a line of like, hey, our Void Miners blew up a planet. That could be bad for us. That could affect profits a little bit. Like, is it profitable to blow up a planet? Maybe not.
How many health
Unless-
scientists would have to do reweave together to bring the planets back? This feels like a Humpty Dumpty.
Yeah,
for the
I mean, so one of the big Stillfleet play tests that went on for a long time with Mike ended with and Ethan with the time travel thing, where it was a whole question like that. It's like, could you just have one character time travel once and change everything, or does that feel really unsatisfying? And would it need to be much bigger, like the group time travels and has to do some very specific series of things because there's some level? I mean, this gets into I think Wikipedia actually has a chart about determinacy and like what if there were many universes, like could you actually segue or jump between them, or are you kind of stuck on some path? And I think that like from a game design standpoint, it's like what's fun. I think from a storytelling standpoint, it's like what's narratively satisfying. Because if it's too easy, I don't think it's fun or narratively satisfying.
Right.
So I think, I think realistically, we don't know what happens after Float City 1, and I don't know. I literally have no idea if Float City 2, which is coming out soon, will address any of these things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's possible that they'll address it. It's possible they won't. But I think it's also just that Float City 1 ends kind of with a big, event, and then you just don't know what happens 2 minutes after. I do like that Qadida, and Ian, this is something we've talked about a lot, and why we want to do this book was I like, while I enjoy kind of murder hobos in space GMing, I really like when players lean into like the more political, diplomatic, weird, like we want to understand what's going on in this situation, which some games really create their whole mechanical engine around. Like Blades in the Dark is more around heist. It's Ocean's 11, but for some reason there's ghosts, and I think Stillfleet is not quite at that. Like it's a little more open, where a venture can be go kill space orcs or whatever. I don't think it should be, but you could easily run it that way. And I think Qadida pushes it in a direction where like you have to run it that way, because if you are fighting in the streets, like you're going to get arrested, and it's like overdetermined. There's so many people like kind of surveilling you. You need to sort of operate in a slick way. So I think that's fun to just tell players that from the get-go and see what they do. It turns out it could lead to very wildly different results, but I think it's working.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what I liked about the setting. It's just like the idea of having, and it's not that like players shouldn't have fights, but I like the idea of like a fight. It's a thought of like having violence having a consequence, right? And that's what I wanted to have in the setting, is that like you can never do it perfectly, but like it's sort of feeling of like actions have a consequence. Like someone will notice, someone will follow up, someone knows, right? And if it's not just the Worshipful Company, that's like, of course, they probably, and that's the thing is like, there's the interesting part about Stillfleet that I really like is like, you can kind of lie to the refactor at the end. And then like that whole chapter in the core rule book about like, you lie to the refactor, like, do your characters tell the truth? That's interesting narratively and mechanically. And I wanted to sort of make that like the whole thing, right? Like you're bouncing off this person to get a favor from this person. Then, if you do this, then this other group is upset with you, and having to juggle those things is really what I was hoping for.
We in the GM chat pre-session 1, I was asking you about surveillance and like how to best portray the concept of being constantly under watch, and the interpretation that I took away from that reminded me of the stuff that I hear about on various podcasts about Bitcoin criminal tracking. And so like Bitcoin is ostensibly anonymous, like you can't see who is who, but once you have one transaction identified on the blockchain, all of their stuff becomes disambiguated, and you now know every transaction they've ever had. And so this idea on Qadida, you're constantly under surveillance, and so there's so much information that they cannot possibly hire enough people to watch everyone all the time. However, once you're a person of interest, now they're like, oh, show me every single time that Ren did anything at all, and you have the full continuity of that. And so you're now a person of interest, and well, de-anonymized.
There's actually an advanced power that is based on the Stasi tactic that was actually used to deal with subversive movements, which wasn't so much about like trying to just like grab them and beat someone up and like throw them out. The idea was you sort of cultivate so many low level informants and everyone knows that you're doing that you can't actually build trust. It was called like decomposition, right? The idea of like you can never it's like people can't trust each other enough to compose any type of movement that could become a threat because they just don't trust anyone else. Right? And that's kind of the vibe I was going for, which, is this sort of feeling. And that's been interesting in talking with people and playtesting. And like when I was describing this to others, like, and maybe this is something, Kelly, you could speak to as a player, in that one of the things I found in some other playtests and talking to people is like I don't have a problem shooting a space gun at some type of giant, like weirdly formed, half human, half nanomachine monster. But the idea of like, I have to basically gaslight someone, to get some low level information felt worse. Like it felt more icky.
Yeah. I mean, there's absolutely a huge difference between the murdering a extra dimensional creature. It's like, okay, fine. It's so far away from what your normal is that it's just like, oh yeah, it's fine. But when you start to have them be like sapient people who you are interacting with in like a normal manner, it starts to make you be very delicate about it, and it's threading a needle versus just stabbing something. And I think that's a big part of it, and I think that's a big part of like what makes it a little bit more not real, but what makes it a little bit more of that intrigue is that you're interacting with these characters that are like real people in their own right, not just mindless whatevers.
Like, were you thinking like having an NPC where like you introduce them, you have them be voiced by the GM, maybe they talk about their family and the kids that they might have, and maybe even interact with the kids, and so like you feel really bad, like if you want to do something bad to them, like that kind of thing, you mean?
Yeah, that's totally what I was thinking. And like I said in our little like team chat, I've been watching a lot of The Americans to like get in the right headspace, and it's you're impacting real people, not just faceless others. So what you it's like reminding yourself that you're not the only person in the universe, and everyone around you is an NPC or like a Skyrim like quest giver. It's like you're talking to real people who are also doing the same thing as you.
It's that when you get like into your character, like your character makes sense and your motivations make sense. And then you can encounter a character, and to avoid spoilers, we could use the shared example of like that fun city character of Vern.
Yes.
Like Vern is a good example of somebody who's like, in terms of structure and politics, is doing bad things, but is also such a likable character on an interpersonal level.
Yeah.
That it becomes hard to do that. Like it'd be really easy to sort of make a character like you, kind of like Kelly said, like if you have those sort of video game enemies where it's like they just sort of mindlessly, their major thing is like, how do I kill the player more effectively? Is their really only motivation. In some ways that's kind of boring for a game like this. It's interesting, like if you want a combat heavy, like I want to just fight, but I think that's not what Qadida is going for.
And I think that's a huge difference between Stillfleet and like D&D. And I play both. I play D&D weekly, and I feel like D&D is very much like combat is what you're trying to do, and it's how you win, and good job, you've won the day.
It definitely encourages murder hoboing for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think like my one Saturday game, we just encountered an enemy that was it was like a 3-part conflict where my party was one, and then there were 2 other parties, one of whom had been helping us in the past, and one of whom my character had like a very 10-year-long relationship with this group of people, and it became very much like, okay, well, how are we going to interact with these, disparate parties who all need to have the same, and who all have the same end goal but can't cooperate for it. So that was an interesting dilemma, because it usually with D&D you don't have that like these people and are trusting, but I think that's one of the benefits of Stillfleet is that you are going to have those people who are people, not just enemies.
I think that Ian, in the Qadida setting, you did a really great job with that, with all the factions. I mean, there are a lot of factions, but because of that, all the NPCs now have, I don't want to call them canned, but they've all have kind of like faction derived motivations that are going to drive a lot of what they do. And so it's a lot easier to sort of justify, what they might want to do that be in conflict with the players. And I think you did that quite a bit in the Around the Dome mini venture, where you have the I forget which factions, but I think one of them was the Waiton.
Affiliated with Mafia, yeah.
Yeah. And so the players are interacting with them, and it's easy to like present them as, like Kelly was saying, like the kind of the one-dimensional quest giver or like flat villain. But there's so much more than that, because they have a way that they've integrated collectively into this society, and they have a role, just like the Swallows or just like the Informatic Mafia or any of them. And so you can't write them off as just being like irrelevant. There's substance there.
Mm-hmm. And part of it too is we are, Wythe and I have talked where we wanted to have substance, but also like one of the things we also want to get at with Qadida is like they can have things that are pretty close ideologically, but not necessarily getting along.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like a bit of does every leftist get along with every other leftist, or more to the point, like with the Qadida as a setting, is it's like if you have like an affiliated Wetton Mafia or like another group like the Matika, like organized crime groups are not necessarily going to get along. They're going to like say, well, if this group goes down, I go up. And also like the idea of having fluid relationships, or like maybe saying like, yeah, we'll ally with each other for interest, but we're not going to be like fighting for each other.
Yeah, which is still something, and we talked about that, like right now, currently we're working on faction rules where like you've mechanicalized it as you can get social status effects, like ongoing bonuses or penalties with certain groups, but there's not, some separate point system to keep track of. But one could imagine something like that. And there are other games that try to sort of lightly, show the relationships between groups. Again, like Blades comes to mind if that is of interest. I feel like I found in practice running those games that part isn't always as fun to mechanicalize, but it is interesting to know like you're in the shit with someone, versus like Kelly, like you're saying, like you have these allies and you're like, oh, okay, well, I know I can go back to these characters if I need to. And maybe that's like in a campaign, maybe that doesn't come up right away, but it's something down the line. You're like, what we should do is go back to whoever it is, the Maquia, and talk about, how we both agree that, the Night Watch is just too dangerous or whatever. But yeah, I definitely like the idea that it's a game where there are different factions, and I think that's something we're going to, for the Refactors Handbook, really focus on with the Worshipful Company, which is that there's different versions of like capitalism doing a bad, and it's not all. It's like there's a real difference between the policies of Barack Obama, the policies of Donald Trump, and like the policies of Adolf Hitler. You know what I mean? And like you can imagine, there's companies that work in all those settings and prefer one policy set versus another.
Mm-hmm.
And I think similarly with Qadida, you can say, well, there's different versions of leftism. So it's like, well, what if there is the socialists win in this world, at least on half of a city on one dwarf planet, but it's a strategically important dwarf planet made of very valuable material, but whatever, it's like a small area, but like, let's do that thought experiment. But even then, yeah, you have all these factions and they disagree on what to happen next. And I really like that, Ian, that you chose to set it. So it's been happening for 10 years. So it's long enough where like, it's not the war, like the war is over, it's a Cold War. but it's also still like really early in this nation's history. So like we don't really know what Free Qadida is. We just know that's people who've agreed they don't want to be part of the company, and the company obviously doesn't like that. So I think that's a really generative place to have characters. Like, I guess something that isn't in the book right now, but I imagine some players will just take over Free Qadida. I would imagine it's just be like, we've got the solution, guys. The four of us have
It's
come up.
us.
Yeah, it's us.
That's like,
I don't know.
you know, the triumvirate taking over Rome, where it's like, well, we're just gonna do this.
Like, oh, scooch. Excuse me, guys.
Like, hey, I look great in this crown, right? Am I right? Yeah.
And maybe make a note to be like, I have to have an emerging monarchist faction to be like, what if we just,
But yes.
But it's like, it's not just because it's revanchist, I guess, in that it's like consolidating power, but it's really not. It's like if the worst leftist shit posters took over part of the United States, like they took over half of Tampa, and we're like, there were like four, it's like if basically like, yeah, the Chapo was crowned the triumvirate because no one else had any better ideas. Like that's a possibility. I'm not saying, I think another possibility is like real, living, some sort of anarcho-socialism or like state socialism, but that's a possibility.
It's Qadida, but like the faction is the filth miners from Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Yes. Absolutely.
Well, it's afternoon, so I just want to do a time check. I don't know what everyone's time was like for this, our first chatty. Thank you again for making the time.
I'm good.
Yeah.
It's only 9 a.m. here, so I'm fine.
Well, you're saying you're a time traveler?
Whoa.
No.
I wouldn't say I travel.
Everyone else is a time traveler, actually. We don't travel at all in Arizona. Everyone else goes forward and backwards. In some ways, we are the center of time because everything moves and we stay still.
Is that why Scottsdale doesn't have public transportation?
Oh, well, we don't have public transportation because we love cars and hate people.
Well,
I will say the bus has air conditioning, and that's why everyone should use the Valley Metro system.
So I have a question for y'all as GMs and like the game builders, but how do you feel having like the list of factions available to you, and like how does that inform how you play these ventures out? Do you prefer to, I feel like for when I've GM'd, it's like it's great to have those bones to work off of. If I'm too open world, I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. This is chaos. But I feel like having that list of, do you tend to roll more on the table of like, well, what faction am I going to have right now? Or, how does that end up informing, how you run the game?
I tend to look at the big tables, and then I sort of just read through them with kind of squinted eyes, and I find the ones that feel the most relevant or that I feel I can hook most easily into the venture. So in this case, it was the Informatic Mafia and the Waiting Mafia, mainly because Ian had already written up NPCs for both, so that was an easy thing. But then also was it the Torturers?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because you had to cross a span. So I have something kind of in reserve just in case for that one. But I mean, the wealth of other factions, I don't have anything prepared for them because it felt like it wasn't immediately relevant to the narrative. But I mean, if y'all go in that direction, then
I think that I actually like too is like when players grab onto factions. That really helps me as a GM. Sometimes I do build things around because it's good when the faction, like it's sort of the basic thing that's, or maybe I'll say up front, like probably compared to the three of you, like a very novice GM. And
I'm so novice.
And I would say like the big thing I want to grab on is I want to put like good pressure on the characters. Like the character wants something, and in that faction relationship, like says your faction wants something. Like in our current game, it's not a spoiler. Like we have one person who's part of like the Honorable Company Expeditionary Force. And one of the things I tried to pressure a little bit was like, even though the Honorable Company isn't exactly a fan of Yellow Tent Shaver, broadly speaking, that gets into that sort of like larger political questions. But I think the idea is like, even if you were sort of the military guerrilla unit and you're not a fan of this person, you also don't want them to get killed, because that makes your faction look weak and bad, especially if you're the kind of like military unit.
Right.
Yeah, like military. I mean, I think that's how I read a lot of the faction stuff into the genre soup. I know that I write for like the factions on Terra and within the company are the two sets that are explored more in the canonical world of the two core rule books of Stillfleet, one of which is out. And I think those are meant to be very quick. Like these, the Honorable Company are just like malice. Like go to the Wikipedia page, look it up. The people on Finash who are revolting are anarchists. Like they're doing what like a Spain style 140 years ago or whatever anarchism. And you can kind of like just give the GM a very quick prop, or like the Wythe Mafia is like the Mafia, like I don't know, like it's just like gives them some prop where like you don't need to do any prep necessarily, and you don't need to like there isn't a lot of lore you need to read to understand that it's like up to you to how to think about how that would intersect with the dominant lore world, whatever the baseline, where like the characters are working for this company that is basically hegemonic. They've taken over a lot of stuff. They've taken over whole planets, and they operate with this very kind of mercantilist early capital. We want to make all these uneven treaties, and we want to control the flow of guns and information, and who gets to sort of teleport around space and time. And how would this other faction then intersect with it? And so I think that's like the it's like a narrative structure thing. So in the core rule book, that's the question. Whereas in Qadida, it's like you're kind of almost playing a different game at that point. You're in this Cold War, and so the factions are intersecting, a little more locally for the most part. Although some of them have these very interesting ties, like obviously the Federation of Unhuman Kingdoms, the idea that there are these, there's basically 4 mutants on Terra doing a Soviet Union, and they're sometimes coming to Qadida and kind of trying to help out, maybe trying to take over. Like, I think that's an interesting way you could bridge Qadida into a game that's not set purely on Qadida, or otherwise you could have characters from Qadida end up going and leaving, which isn't really the intent. Like the intent of the book is clearly like focused in the city, but I think factions give you a lot of props as a GM to like push players also on and off locations, which can be fun.
If you get a faction like the Federation of Unhuman Kingdoms, you're like, oh, Terra becomes an open space, even if not in the game for a discussion, like what's going on Terra.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes almost Latin America as a play point between the Soviet Union and America.
Right. You set up ecotones or like proxy wars or whatever. Yeah, and Qadida is one already. But then you can always reverse the camera in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's part of what I like. I also was going for as all these factions is it's not like just one proxy war between the Honorable Co and the Worshipful Company. It's like you can have these smaller, like especially in Worshipful Qadida, like you have these smaller, like sort of street level proxy conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
And then in Free Qadida, you also have like sort of parties and political conflicts. Like there's groups that want their version of like state socialism or communism is a little bit different, like with a different emphasis. And at times, you could like in games people could play that they all get along, and others they could be like, no, right? And I didn't, part of me did want to actually get into those real world type things, like some who are really into industry, and then some who are like into information technology. It'd be like if we're going to have a sort of planned economy, like the people who say industry first and the people who kind of say information technology first, like they're not going to resolve their thing through a bar fight in initiative. Right. They're not necessarily, well, I mean, they could, but like,
I'm not saying I wouldn't pay to see that.
But like they are not going to necessarily like, but if there's a chance where like that, the sort of like information technology one could kind of, undermine some of the members of the industrial one, would they go for that? Like,
I think this is like what Kelly was saying earlier about the factions. I mean, it's about the consequences issue. When you have all these factions, it's super easy as a GM to be like, oh yeah, that person that you like snubbed on the sidewalk, they're a member of the Informatic Mafia, and guess what? They're the boss's son. Well, son.
Of course.
And they don't like you. And so like, you can just instantly just run off with that.
Yeah, they're the bosses. Whatever the next build of the boss.
Right.
In a different architecture. Yeah, I mean, yeah, factions give you instant conflicts, instant ways to change location, instant allies. I mean, they can just kind of provide that. But I think writing them is tricky because you want it to be weird and speculative, or I do anyway with sci-fi stuff and fantasy stuff. But you also, I think, want to give enough real world something to hold on to, so it's kind of obvious who these people are without being too like, oh, they are exactly like whatever the Zapatistas or rail workers unions, or what I mean. It can't be like one to one, but just give you a sense of how as a GM they like. I like the Swallows, for example, Ian. So Ian, came up with this idea of a faction that goes between all the other factions and just delivers information for a price, and that they just focus on kind of being neutral arbiters of information. And I think that is really interesting. And I think similarly, having a haunted, demilitarized zone in between kind of all the factions that no one really can own. It's too dangerous or unknown or whatever. It gives some MacGuffins for the GM to introduce kind of perpendicular things. So like you said, not every conflict devolves into a very neat kind of left-right binary where it's ultimately worshipful company versus honorable company. It's like much more complex and real, just like in the real world. For better or for worse, it's much more complex and real. So
I want to go in the span so bad.
Yes.
I want you to go into the span.
I want to go into the span so bad.
I could make a commitment now that no matter what, the final game is just like in the span for reasons that will be shoehorned. But I don't want to commit, so we'll see. We have to just do a separate span.
We'll have to see how it goes.
Yeah,
it's so funny because like everyone's so excited about the span, and I like honestly the first experimental venture and the mini venture I wrote, I'm like, I just want to go around the span.
Well, I like that Aaron and I both had the touch point of, DC, Washington, D.C. as a place where it's like you can go from the burnt out husk houses into the absolutely beautiful ambassador houses. And like that's immediately, I feel like we mind melded there. And I feel like it was Rachel and Leo were just like, okay.
Yeah, there was some ethnocentrism on my part, forgetting that, like, oh yeah, the rest of the world doesn't necessarily know what DC is like. DC Metro.
I mean, no, we found the pictures. I found the pictures. I got it. I was trying to help out there at the same time, but I knew what you were going for, and I feel like it's fun having an international game and being able to be like, this is the thing that we're thinking of.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's what's always funny about, like, I remember reading The City in the City by Chana Miéville and thinking, very specifically about places I'd been and divided cities. But then, whenever I talked with someone, they're like, oh, you mean X? And they would say that the metaphor is about a different division. And it was just very interesting how speculative fiction does that. And I think that's, to me, the best kind of sci-fi is like, it's not quite like, because there is like, I think you're right, like DC, which I've spent time in, has weirdly, it's like, there's really poor parts, there's really rich parts, there's obviously the empire's capital, and then there's also just swamp. And then similar, like you go to Boston and there's really rich parts, mostly kind of middle class parts, lower middle class parts, but there's also like just some swamp in the middle. And it's very kind of weird in that sense. Like I remember being in Boston in traffic with my older brother who was visiting, and just like a bunch of wild turkeys kind of came at us. Like we're sitting in a car in traffic, and like there's just a family of wild turkeys like yelling at us in Turkey, and we're just like, what the fuck is it? Because we're close to the Fin, and that's where they live. So I feel like that again, it feels like a real thing that it would be hard to simulate if you had too neat of a, if Ian had drawn a circle and just a line down the middle and was like free, unfree. And even like going back, like I was rewatching my favorite show ever, Aeon Flux, which is about actually a sci-fi city that is divided in half. I mean, that is the canonical like setting, and beyond it is like a wasteland. But even then, you have a lot of weird porosity, and people just kind of are able to get across, even though there's a whole, there's a very clear like you cannot cross or you'll get shot down and your limbs will be amputated, which is very like disturbing to watch. But it's like there's also episodes where just suddenly people sneak across. And I feel like that porosity feels both like it's kind of a cheat, but it's kind of like, I guess that's how all borders are. And that's part of what makes a game about borders and border crossing kind of fun is and like raises the stakes. Like, yeah, there's real danger every single time. There's real factions care, but also some people they just accept that. That's their life.
in Malcolm, life finds a way.
Well,
Yes.
it's like that idea like I like of consequences, but they don't always have to be like lethal, violent consequences.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it could be something like you can get across, it's just going to cost you, or you can get across, but like you can't bring all this really nice archaea that would solve your problems, like because that would be too, you know, like one of the things I liked about you know, one of the reasons I put in the span is that way you can't just like haul archaea. You know, the idea of having a game of borders puts a good mechanical complication on the players. Like if you have this one piece of really nice archaea that would solve your problem in free Qadida, for example, you have to drag it across all of these borders and have it not get confiscated.
Right.
You know, so it sort of is interesting in that way. But also, when we were talking, what I am liking about the setting is like it feels like there's the concept is there, even though the points of inspiration are really different. In that, like, I kind of modeled Worshipful Qadida specifically on a lot of the ways Moroccan cities, especially in the north of Morocco, work, where there's kind of a Ville Nouveau, like a French-built colonial part, which is kind of like what Little Spindle is supposed to be, like in the administrative quarter. Like, it's supposed to be made comfortable for sort of the colonial masters, and then there's like an old city. Now, in Morocco, it's not like the old city is bad. The old city is actually pretty nice. And to get the dynamics of the real estate dynamics of Marrakesh, which is a nice, like, you know, segue there. Like the people who've lived in Marrakesh for a long time, they actually want to move to the newer parts, and like the European people want to rent the sort of the authentic Medina old apartment experience. So there's kind of like a swapping going on in the real world. But I wanted that idea just because I think, again, like it makes it richer than like Worshipful is all the same and Free is all the same.
Right.
And to give that gradation, and it allows for like different, also it just allows for like different expressions. Like on the Worshipful side, you can see like that it really emphasizes, and I think in a way that hopefully feels clear, like colonialism. We're doing a colonialism.
Yes, absolutely.
That's part of why I wanted that Ville Nouveau feel to be like, this is definitely like a and also having like colonial administration as a name for something. Like,
right, and that's more than the core rulebook, and we made that choice consciously too, to make it more of a setting of this is the company about to do more colonialism, and in many cases, what they really have are trading posts, and they have like a small standing kind of mercenary army, but they haven't really like. They don't really control planets per se. They control some trade of some goods on some planets. But in this case, it's like fast forwarding, like, okay, they've done a colonialism. Like this is straight up. And I think exploring how that affects the psyche of the colonizer and the colonized, I mean, all the sort of Fanon stuff is really interesting. And there are other games starting to do this, but I think that's like ripe for TTRPGs to explore, especially since the Dragon game just didn't do that for a long time, even though it's clearly baked into like a lot of the canonical universe of like Wizards IP. So I'd like to think that Qadida, is like a nice chance to just kind of, you know, I don't know, like emphasize that in a way that feels fun and generative of spy stories that are interesting and could lead to like, you know, maybe again, you like say the players actually make some difference, and it's in this setting, it's small enough where it feels possible and interesting, as opposed to like, okay, the entire universe, who knows, you know.
There's a good line I just was reading. Warren Ellis did a graphic novel reinterpretation of some James Bond books, which I really enjoyed because some of it felt like updated too, like to be in a more contemporary moment. But one of the things that a line that James Bond has was about like the British Empire developed an intelligence service because their empire was collapsing. Like the line is something like, our empire collapsed first, so that's why we learned to club people in the dark. And like where America and other places, like because their empires haven't started that decline in the same way, like comparatively, right? Compared to like ruling the seas and something else, like Britain got ahead in like secret intelligence service because their empire was in like declined first. Or their decline was more rapid.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so it's the pressure points, the squeaky wheel getting the grease. So in that case, like Qadida is an example of where there's good like a Rococo phase of the company doing bad stuff because it's kind of going southward, and probably the same in like Fanislary or whatever. but then there's these other planets where they're kind of they're achieving their objectives, and so that's not, you know, it's more just straight up medieval whatever warfare. It's not like spy stories.
Yeah, it's sort of like, maybe this gets really meta, but the idea of the worshipful company, or maybe not meta, but like too large, but it's like, since this is in the future of the far future, like the worshipful company, I kind of see as the state of like, are they a company or are they an empire, right?
Yeah.
And having to say like, when, you know, in real life, like there was that challenge of like the East India Company or the British, you know, like that type of thing, which the East India Company, I think, just eventually got absorbed into the British Empire, right?
Yeah.
When things got to, when things got out of hand, more so, like, or
When
too
they started
much.
to screw up, yeah. But
Yeah.
there is no other empire. There's no outside of the company. It's not part of a nation. It is the nation.
Right.
So, you know, the idea was like, if Amazon was a nation, what pressures would it exert? You know, would it have a giant standing army? No, I think it'd have like elite mercenary teams that went around, you know, making logistics smoother or whatever.
And I think it makes a lot of sense that the company doesn't want to run these places. It just wants to be able to exert the power.
Right.
Like,
right.
we don't want to spend the time and do the actual ruling. We just want to have these puppets who can do it for us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's kind of the feeling I wanted in, you know, in a lot of places. That might be a good way to approach something like Qadida, is like the worshipful company wants these puppets, but is that actually going to work?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I actually really like that, again, about Qadida specifically, is so Free Qadida isn't just HCO or the FUK or whatever. It's its own thing, and it could go in any of those directions. It could be more anarchistic. It could be more basically a pawn of a large organization somewhere else. But also Worshipful Qadida, while very much right now just part of the company, could also be like its own thing that rebels against the company in its own way. And I think that it still might not be a social state, you know. So it's interesting when you have that kind of like proxy war setup. And again, the players could. I think that comes down also to the venture writing and Ian, things you want to include in the book. So this is all stuff to think about, like what gets emphasized and how does it, even like graphically, like how big is different through lines. It's like, how much do you want players? Maybe this is a good sort of segue toward let's maybe end in the next few minutes. But you know, how much do you want players to? How do you want players to use this book? You know, how do you imagine? Maybe we've already talked about a lot of them, but how do you see Qadida as being like a fun thing for GMs to pick up, for players to pick up, and kind of explore?
Boy, actually, I would say I want to maybe throw this out to Aaron and Kelly. I want to punt this one a little bit, because like I think I want to come back to it, but
the thing that struck me most immediately when reviewing the material to kind of develop my side of the venture is the whole dome of Qadida is this like weird like Jenga block balance where everything is kind of in its place, and there's always like little bits of like little incursions and little resistances, but it's all like everything is just crammed in there and occupies some space, and they're all just trying to both exist but also maybe exist a little bit more than they were before. And so it creates this like implicit tension that all you have to do is just pick a spot, and then you have all of the like you know, conflicts are all not predetermined but like readily available, and you can know exactly where all of your edges are and where all of your like points of contention are. It's great. I mean, flavor wise it's fantastic and interesting because spy stuff is always really cool, but I mean, just like for building a narrative though, I love how like just ready to go it is for like easily developing conflict. It was so much easier than I was expecting it was going to be because of all the stuff that was written. So
have you guys ever heard of it's like a game development story about the load-bearing coconut?
what?
Okay. So I'm probably going to absolutely ruin this, but the idea of the load-bearing coconut is that, you know, a game dev needed to have like a specific unit of space represented in the game, but they couldn't just have it be a blank space. So they made a coconut, and then they like stripped out all of the like display data, but they still needed the coconut there to build everything else and like occupy those spaces. But one day someone else comes back and is like, why do we have this random coconut artifact in this game, and then tries to delete it, and then the game falls apart and can't exist. So it's kind of like trying to find that load-bearing coconut and seeing what happens when we get rid of it. I enjoy, it's the Jenga piece, but also what happens when you get rid of this one tiny aspect and how that will ripple out and destroy the game. Okay, I massacred that, but like Google load-bearing coconut. I think something will come up for that, maybe.
No, that's great. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So Ian, yeah, go ahead. What is?
I think that's really what I think what they filled in is a little bit of what I was going for, is like to have like a series of tipping points that GMs and players can, like, in many ways, maybe the different metaphors. Like, I wanted a series of loose threads that people could, like, players and GMs could pull and see what comes out. And some of these threads, and the nice part is that a lot of these threads are tied to, in the idea of Qadida, is that there are no completely loose threads, right? Something is tied, everything is tied to everything else. And because I study a lot of, like, what is a community? That's kind of my biggest research question, like, what is community? And a thing that I also want to pull out of Qadida is the option of having, again, like I think we said before, like having more complex, like building complex relationships in a way of like not just friends and enemies, like people who will help you, people you can murder, right? It's the like,
those are it. Those are the
That's
two genders.
the two genders, friends and victims, the two genders. And, but I want to complicate that because someone could be both your victim and your friend, right? What happens when they are a little of each?
But Ian, friends and victims is such a good like X and Y construction for a game. So I feel like we need our modern game to be called friends and victims.
That's the sort of like just combat heavy version, is the friends and victims.
It's a lasers and feelings hack.
Yeah, yeah. That's the game played in Qadida by the characters who the people living on Qadida play friends and victims. Yeah.
Oops, all frenemies.
Yes. Gosh, when I made a faction chart that Kelly hasn't seen yet, where it's like how each faction relates to each other faction. Like what do they feel about each other? And I almost put in frenemies at first, but that was a description. But I have like a fluid relationship of like, well, it kind of depends. Right? I think one of the things that I really want, if I were to have the book, broadly speaking, is to really extend on some of those themes of Stillfleet. Because I think one of the big things about Stillfleet that I appreciate is that it's about imagining futures that are different from our own, like imagining possibility. And I think where we get constrained, and having come out of a seminar about Cold War thinking, is there was a lot of constraint that was like we couldn't imagine the impossible things of detente or peace. And that made a lot of like our decision making really bad. And one of the things that said, one of the weird pieces of Cold War rhetoric that doesn't get talked about enough was like Senator Fulbright was trying to like say we needed some type of detente, not because we should like say communism is good actually, but to be like, look, let's be more realistic. Some place like Cuba is a nuisance, not a threat, right? Stop saying like it's an all or nothing thing. And I think what I wanted to have with something like Qadida is that idea of once we get out of that friends and victims mentality, we can have those, we could really achieve that, we're able to achieve that potential that Stillfleet really builds and promises, right? And it's not the core rulebook absolutely does that, but like this directs in that, it goes in that direction to be like what are some possibility spaces, right? And in pursuit of those and also the second part is to recognize that pursuit of those, like the pursuit of the world you want is going to have a cost. And that's one of the things I like about Spycraft is that like you can be a true believer in a cause, but you have to, again, it's like being if I want to achieve my goal of, luxury gay space communism, but I have to gaslight a lot of people to do it.
Right.
Like,
or kill people, frankly.
Or kill people,
or
right?
Like,
well, that's part of what I said, like, part of I said gaslight specifically because like people are uncomfortable with that. Like, it's like there is a power murder where you can just kill someone, but there isn't a power of like, I guess there is a power of con where you just say it and they believe it.
Right.
I took it. I can't wait to use it.
I will say in this setting, like Khan is almost overpowered. Where I had to make some like characters that like were Khan.
Right.
Like I don't know if it came up in your game, but like Python has a status where like Khan works on her, but it costs double.
Oh, interesting.
I like that.
It didn't come up.
Yeah, I haven't used it yet, but like that
Yeah.
makes perfect sense because I love the idea of powers like con and dive, but you have to sometimes just be like, okay, but this is going to cost you double, triple. Like you need to really sell this and make it work.
Did you go ahead and give me a limb?
Yeah.
Well, like it works on Gendarme 1, but Gendarmes 2 through 99, you know, like it doesn't. You don't have the grit to have it work on all of them as they come up. So it's like it's like delaying, kicking the ball down the road. I think sometimes that does come down to like the GM balancing, like say like the fun having the agency of the player versus the narrative elegance of like. It doesn't really make sense if just every lie works forever and everyone's letting the players do whatever they want. You know,
your wig is really good at first, but as you keep going, it like starts to move and like the edges aren't laid and it's bad.
Well, and the setting pushes on the powers. Like if you just need to lie to a gendarme you're never going to see again, like it's great. But if you have to lie to like a core NPC quest giver, like. Maybe that line doesn't hold up, but I think it's that idea of, in some cases, I think the two big things with Qadida is like imagining a possible world and then having players ask themselves like, what are they willing to do to get there? And it's not necessarily about like you have to do bad things to get to the good world that you want, but you might have to like, work a little harder, change your perspective.
When you talk about using con, it made me think of how like in a game like D&D or something, everyone's a murder hobo because killing is a throwaway act usually. And if a situation like con, if you're using con on a random guard somewhere, you'll probably never see them again. There's no consequences. But in Qadida, if you want to con someone, that's going to probably come back to haunt you. And maintaining a lie can be very difficult. And so I think as a GM, and no spoilers, Kelly, but expect this. If you use con, you better believe that I'm going to hold you to that, and you're going to have to uphold any lies that you make.
My notes are going to have to be a lot more detailed.
I do like that as a GM, by the way, of like if you use con and then it comes back around, and your player has to like the player or the character has to remember their lie. Like maybe they have to like roll. A simple thing mechanically might be like you have to roll reason to like recall like, oh, I remember that lie.
Yeah, and this is stuff we should actually write in. We can write into Qadida, and then bring like I think we talked about some of this. I think will show up in the Refactor's Handbook as like we've played the game even more. Like it was play tested obviously before we did the core rulebook, which is also just very long. So we want to also build on it and publish things that are like really make the game useful and open it up. And in part because the grid system works. We've played a lot of fantasy games using it too, and you could do modern games. You could do whatever you want and use basically the same underlying system, the same powers even. And with the Hell Science, you could just have it not exist, or it's more rare, or whatever. But I think a lot of the fun from the design standpoint is like thinking through these different cases and kind of formalizing them in a sense, making them clear, so it's easy for a GM and a player to read a thing quickly and be like, oh, that makes sense, and kind of move on. So I think Qadida does a great job with that, with detectives, spies, the politics, all the things we're talking about. And I think the stream is super fun. And I appreciate you guys for diving in and doing this sort of random idea of this double venture. With that note, we are at like an hour and a half. So I'm thinking maybe we should probably call it, unless there's some final questions or somebody in the chat wants to jump in.
There's a chat?
Yeah, I can't participate in it because I don't think I think I have to sign in first.
Oh, the Twitch chat.
The Twitch chat, yeah.
Oh wait,
it's
that's
also
Twitch chat
integrated into StreamYard, yeah. So we're on Twitch. That is, Aaron, if you're new to the internet, there's a thing called Twitch.
Wait, is that like email?
It's kind of like email, yeah. It's like video email where you're getting the email over and over again.
Well, I think it's basically like, it's like LinkedIn, but a lot less dating.
Yeah.
It's pretend LinkedIn.
First, you need bus fare.
It's like Tinder, but with fewer job opportunities.
Yes. Precisely.
So on that note, thank y'all for a wonderful chat. And Aaron found Twitch. This is great. this stream record works pretty well. And sorry, Kelly, I couldn't figure out how to move the logo from floating right next to your head, but
It's fine. Oh, there we go.
there you go. Look, you're touching it. Whoa, that's cool. All right. Well, maybe we can do this again. But I think so. I don't know. It seems still a little bit up in the air, but I would really like to lock these in. So I'm going to make these announcements in hope. So this isn't finalized, but I think it's getting there. The next game would be June 25th, which is a Sunday, and that would be the second Worshipful Company game. So Aaron would be GMing, Kelly would be playing, Ian and I would be watching. Thank you, Abominable Mystery. And the final game looks like it might be as early as July 2nd, and so that would be the big finale. So that's either finale or denouement. We'll see how much happens with the Worshipful Company, what you accomplish. And we'll see if we get to the span. But I think those are the dates. I think that will be will work out for everyone schedule-wise, which is great, and means that we're stretching this out a little, but I think that's fun. And then we'll do some more games after that. But thank you guys again for jumping into this mini campaign.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, this has been great.
Awesome. We'll see y'all later. I'm gonna end broadcast. Thank you.
Don't forget to follow Qadida on Kickstarter.
Oh
yes. Yeah.
Please let people know. Let your friends know if you're interested. Ian's book's really great, and of course we have lots of art by Ethan and the whole team. I'm writing a bunch of tables about flowers that kill you if you eat them, except if you're a Gelastian, then they become jelly beans.
And Ethan did draw a really cool truck. I can't emphasize that enough.
It's a cool truck. I'll post that on Instagram.
I really want this microeconomy of Gelasti jelly beans.
Yes, I also want that too.
I'm here for this.
We got to add it now. All right.
New mini
Bye,
venture.
Thank
guys.
you.